T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, my space friends. Welcome to the Launch Sequence Podcast. This is episode 100. We made it. So I'm doing something a little different this week, launching it on the main channel so that you guys can see kind of a little bit of a journey I went through over the last few weeks, asking different YouTube creators about their feelings about Star Citizen right now. 3.18's launch was pretty rough, and a lot of new players are asking the question, is stability ever going to be a focus, or are we just going to keep getting new features? And I think there is a big discussion to be had about what is more important at this time in development for each person. So I talked over the last couple of weeks with various creators that I've talked to in the past and got their opinions on the priorities of CIG, Star Citizen, and if it's headed in the right direction. Thought you guys might be interested in hearing the conversations, so I gathered them all up into a little summary. But I'm going to release all of them again on my second channel in full length, so if you want to see those, make sure to subscribe down below. Enough of me talking though, let's get to the guests. Starting off with the Space Coder, the first person I actually ever really met in the Star Citizen community years back. Getting started with him and talking about kind of what he likes about the game, you know. Get us started off before we get into the meat of the discussion. I'll have this all chaptered down below so you can skip to whatever you'd like to see, and I hope you enjoy the show. I'm getting thoughts from various people for a couple of different things, and wanted to get your thoughts on these last few questions. So, first, I wanted to know what you think sets Star Citizen apart from other games on the market, like the actual secret sauce. It could be a gun that you like. It could be as complex as their back-end framework, whatever it might be.
It's two things, really. Number one is the ambition, like the sheer ambition of this project, where like it excites me as a developer that they actually want to do this and they're actually making steps towards doing this. That's exciting to me as a developer. And number two, just the insane level of detail. In Star Citizen, everything is very carefully created, from the smallest little coffee mug to planets. And they always improve upon it. And it always looks better, bigger, and just more detail. That's what I love. And kind of a bonus one is that you really forge your own path. Like, nobody says you have to do anything. You can just fly around and take pictures, which is what I did for the first 2 years of me owning Star Citizen.
I don't know, man. Elevators tend to decide whether or not I continue.
That's true. Elevators are a little bit tricky, but they will get there eventually. Like they will come around to the whole dream of Star Citizen.
Mm-hmm.
But until then, it will be death and destruction every time you take an elevator.
The detail in this game is definitely something to behold. I get what you mean about the ambition, because it's like there's something about getting into a game not because you want to play the game, but just because you want to be present in it.
Yeah.
And I think there are not that many games. There are a lot of games where that feeling comes up. Like I used to get that when I would play the earlier Halos, but not many games actually present it to you. Like something like Red Dead Redemption 2 would. And Star Citizen feels like it does that on such a grand scale with space. It's hard to match that.
Yeah.
The effectiveness of their strategy is up for debate, but I do think we're seeing a higher amount of new tangible locations and features coming into the game that people actually appreciate. That being said, the way they're building it with more detail and depth with these features and locations is part of the reason the game has taken so long. That, along with pushing features over pushing stability and putting a lot of resources into things like Squadron 42 over, Star Citizen, it frustrates people, and it brings up the question of where are their priorities and are they going in the right place? So that's the whole point of this show, and I guess let's get into it, starting off again, or rather continuing on with Space Coder. Well, looking at the model that they've chosen with that, the way that they've kind of they're consistently building a game engine on along with like an alpha of a game that they have to keep running in real time as they build another version of that game. It's just a lot, and the way they've done the releases has gotten on a lot of people's nerves. Do you feel like they're still going about it the right way? Do they need to start to shift focus or shift priorities?
I think a lot of people because a lot of new people came into the project, over the last 2 years. And they're seeing kind of like the last years, I think all of us that have been around for a long time can agree that they were very turbulent, and delays and features being pushed back, major changes in the company. And I think, those of us who've been around a long time, this is no surprise to us. We see it as a bump in the road. But people who came in amongst this and they're expecting an improvement they're not getting, they might be frustrated. But ultimately, I think CIG is doing the best they can do. So they have the quarterly-ish release model going on. And it works. They deliver new content every 3 months, roughly. And it keeps the player base engaged as much as it can. I don't think more frequent releases would help, because that would just lower the scope for things, and a lot of things wouldn't make it in, and it would make planning a lot more difficult. Having a longer release window would probably lead to a lot of dead zones in activity, which we already have. That's, usually like 2-3 weeks before an expected major patch, it's pretty dead all over the place. So I think they're in a good place right now. They need to optimize some things, like they're doing with the testing process right now, and performance. That's good. They needed to do that, but they didn't know they needed to do it until now. They need to sort of rework how they manage releases. Their communication needs a little bit of work, but that's okay. That will probably never be perfect, and it will take them a long time to dial that in properly. Development-wise, they're doing the best they can. Like I think the project that I work on is similar in scale to Star Citizen, and I know the kind of problems that we have, and I imagine CIG are sharing a lot of those problems. So I don't think they can do much better on the development side. They did have 2 major reorgs on the development over the last 2 years. I don't think that helped particularly. I think the current setup is good. We will see how that goes moving forward. Yeah. And I think that was the point I wanted to make. They're doing good. Like CIG is doing good. There are areas that need improvement, but they're overall working towards the goal. It's maybe not the speed that a lot of people are expecting. Personally, what I would like to see is sort of more information on what's happening in a reading the monthly report is great. You learn a lot of information. But I would like if they brought back the old release tracker for at least partially, to where they would maybe not do multiple quarters forward, because that's not tenable given the current state. But if they would just kind of fill it out first with this is the things that we are tentative about for the next patch, and then just confirm or remove things.
Well, they were supposed to have 2 patches at all times, right?
They were.
So once they ship 3.18, we should see 3.20, but we probably won't.
I don't think we will. I think that idea kind of went out the window with 3.18.
Yeah.
Because for one, I don't think they know the extent of what will be required to stabilize 3.18. They don't know how that will affect 3.19, and they don't know how 3.19 will affect the items down the line, because I don't think work on a lot of those things has begun yet, so they can't tell. Obviously, there's the long-term stuff that's underway, server meshing, physicalized cargo, economy simulation, that kind of stuff that's long underway. But anything that would actually be relevant for the release tracker, I don't think they know yet.
Yeah,
we might see it when we hit 3.19 PTU. They will do 3.20.
Maybe.
Spoiler
alert, they did with 3.20. This is actually filmed a couple weeks ago, so we were a little bit behind. But this idea that new players are looking at the game differently and understanding it differently than older players is true. It's not an attack, it's the way it is. It's a problem that CIG has with trying to continuously keep the messaging up to date on concepts surrounding the game. We see this with things like engineering and Death of a Spaceman, and even insurance sometimes comes up in this discussion. So they have a really unique problem where players are testing a game that's nowhere near the final version of what it's actually going to be. In that same instance, we're testing the game over years and years of time. You're going to have people who are veterans joining right now, when in 3 years, other people are considered newcomers. And those people are going to have different understandings of what Star Citizen is supposed to be, what it is right now, what it's going to be. In the same way that people who are starting right now have a different idea to people from before. So this is kind of an interesting angle, I think, to approach it all from. And I thought I would talk about it a little bit more with my next guest, Morphologis, who is well known in the community and has definitely seen his own fair share of reactions to his opinions. But he does kind of seem to notice a similar sort of thing going on between players. So I wanted to know if he thought that was going to have any effect on, development or how people looked at the development. Okay, so the community has grown a ton. I was crunching some numbers the other day, and it looks like account numbers by the end of this year will have more accounts created after COVID-19 started than before. To put into perspective how much of that account is heavily skewed towards later on. And I know they started their little referrals a little later, so obviously that leads to more accounts being added later and all that kind of stuff. But obviously a lot of people have joined in the last year or two. A lot because of Elite Dangerous having some trouble, a lot just because Star Citizen got a little bit better. But do you think the number of people who are joining now, being introduced to a new game, like when we joined, me and you, we couldn't even go to Port Olisar, let alone a planet, let alone running missions or playing with tractor beams. So our idea of what Star Citizen was going to be was kind of different than what it might be for somebody who jumps in now and plays. Do you think that difference in perspective is going to cause problems as we go further and that older player base is being outnumbered?
I think it's going to cause drama in the community, but I don't think it's going to alter the trajectory of Star Citizen's development too much, because they seem pretty sure what they want to do. They're focused on Squadron, and the stuff for Star Citizen seems like they also have an idea of what they want to do for. Sure, there are some gameplay systems that will be tweaked, but for example, in the new flight model, they're not even concerned with feedback for it. They're just going to implement it for Squadron, and then eventually we're going to get it. And at that point, it'll be too late to really change it if there are any significant issues. Now, I'm pretty confident it's going to be good. Like from what they said, it's what we need. But it's not something. I think we're past the stage where there's going to be huge shifts in Star Citizen's development because of community feedback. It'll be small things. It'll be small things. More, like I said, more of what's going to happen, I see, is going to be people in the community being confused or upset or angry with perception of where the game is supposed to go. There's been a lot of drama in the community about PvP and PvE, and how some people feel like they want a private server and that PvP is all griefing and stuff. Whereas some people who've been around for longer who, know more about the pitch of Star Citizen know that was always part of the plan. And there's just a lot of this, but it's not really affecting CIG's plans at all. They're not changing direction because of that feedback. They're going to do what they're going to do, and they're not being clear with what they're going to do, but they're going to do something, and they know what they're going to do. If that makes sense.
Yeah. This conversation actually went towards the skill system that we talked about at CitizenCon last year, because I think that that's one of those topics that newer players are definitely more open to than older players, just mainly because of the communication that CIG has had around skills and the whole point of progression in the game over the years. But this skill system does kind of point out that the large parts of this game are pretty set in stone. The idea of what we're going to be doing, the professions, the game loops, that kind of stuff. But the actual character customization and smaller details do seem like they're up to shift a little bit. I mean, hex codes, anybody? These interviews, by the way, are going to be posted in full. They are pretty interesting. There's a lot of them. And this is my normal podcast, so I will be posting these over probably the next month or two to my normal podcast platforms, on audio platforms if you're listening there, or on my second YouTube channel. I'll have this on my main channel, but the second channel is where the podcast usually is. I'll have that link down below for you. But me and Morph did go back to priorities, because that's the whole point of this conversation. I wanted to know what his opinion was on where CIG is putting all their resources and whether they're going in the right direction. Let's have a listen. Do you think that what the company is doing is what's best for the game and the community as a whole? Or do you think that there's something they need to shift when it comes to their priorities?
I think that their priorities are where they need to be for them right now. I'm not somebody who works at CIG. I can't tell you what's going on internally, but them focusing all completely on Squadron makes sense to get that out and out of the way so that they can put some resources back on Star Citizen. Because the way I look at it and the way I've been explaining it for a while now is that people don't buy Star Citizen for Squadron anymore. It's people buy Star Citizen for Star Citizen because all the advertisement comes from streams and YouTube videos. And so people only know about Star Citizen. So what that creates is this effect of the game Star Citizen is what's funding Squadron completely. Like Squadron isn't paying for itself at all. So all of that, all of those 800 developers, with most of them working on Squadron, all of their income rests on the shoulders of the ship team to produce enough ships to fund the entire project. So they need to get that out the door to make it pay for itself, to make the financials make sense, because it's not paid for itself for a really long time. Once it's out the door and people are buying Squadron for Squadron, they have more financial backing to be able to hopefully get more developers to work on Star Citizen and focus on that and the things that we really need, all the gameplay systems. So like I said, that's my perspective on it. I think that's why they're focusing on Squadron and why I think that priority makes a lot of sense. As somebody who plays Star Citizen, I'm like, I hate it so much. I wish they would focus only on Star Citizen, but realistically, with all the effort they put into Squadron, I can't fault them for putting all of their effort on it right now. So yes, that's where I am. Like like the community, I understand like their idea for a lot of people is like, what is Squadron 42? I bought this game for Star Citizen, focus on Star Citizen. I get that perspective completely. And it's CIG's fault for talking about Star Citizen as a live service and advertising it as such in all of their, marketing material and getting a lot of people excited for it. But they got to do what they got to do.
Yeah. And do you think when it comes to that advertising, specifically with Star Citizen, should they be focusing on making the game play more like those trailers and more like people dream of, or should they be trying mainly just to get more features in as fast as they can?
I
or
think
some third
they need
option.
to get I mean, and again, I'm not a developer, but my sense is that they need to get more features in because we're in the alpha stage still, and beta is when you start bug fixing. So they need to keep getting features in and then seeing how those features play with existing features and then fix balance problems, which are inevitably going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the problem with just stopping development and fixing what they have, is because everything can break potentially with anything that they introduce later, like the economy, for example, which we don't have. We don't have a stock ticker. We don't have an Mobiglass app to look at where we can buy and sell stuff. Imagine how that's going to affect the economy when that happens, how it's going to affect pirating, how it's going to affect bounty hunting. Like it's going to put people in certain areas for interaction in a way that we don't have right now. And then how server meshing is going to completely change the way the game is experienced, and how PES is transforming the experience of the game right now with all the junk people leave around. Like that issue is bizarre and interesting to watch. Like that's why they need to keep adding these features to figure out what problems they create and fix them. And the game is going to be in a pretty broken state then for a long time. But I think they're only prolonging that pain to focus on only fixing existing issues. They know that though. Like I'm only saying this for the benefit of viewers who don't know, because from what I understand from CIG, they understand that they need to focus on getting features out. It's not like that's anything new. It's a revelation. It's only, like I said, that they're focused on Squadron right now, and that's why most of the features that they're working on are going to Squadron first, and we're not getting anything really in Star Citizen yet. Like if you read the monthly reports, you can see, like you said, there's a lot of cool new features going into Star Citizen, but it's for Squadron, and we can't experience them yet. So star maps and AI stuff and the mech suits, and like I was like, every time I read it, I'm like, dang it, you don't have any of that yet, and you already have it in Squadron. It's not fair.
Yeah.
Wanna
Yeah.
throw something.
Well, 2 years, right? It's always 2 years more.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that guy at the end there. That's for those who don't know, me and my wife actually live here in Turkey, and there is a mosque right outside our window. So every once in a while, Call to Prayer blasts its way into our podcast. But back to the conversation with Morph, he makes a great point about the importance of Squadron 42 to the success of Star Citizen. Obviously, Star Citizen is still only getting funded by ship sales, and at some point, with all this growing they're doing, they're expanding into new studios, they're getting a lot more employees out in the UK and just doing a lot of overall growth. They seem to be expecting some kind of influx of cash. I think that is Squadron 42 sales, if not further in the future. Don't quote me on it, possibly go into the consoles, maybe the following generation. Regardless, Squadron 42's importance is explained. It's unfortunate and it's not great how it's been handled, but it's explained. Features versus stability, though, is a debate when it comes to Star Citizen, and one where Morph does note features being important. I think a lot of people do agree with that, but my next guests have a little bit of a different opinion on that. Bugs and stability are very important to a lot of people, and like we've focused on here, generally they're newer people who are joining the game, but people from all parts of the community are looking for different things. So my following guests, Tree0311 and Nazeris, both do their own podcast on Star Citizen. Check that out down below. But they also have their own differing opinions on this topic. Let's listen in. Like, as a whole, you're looking at where we are in the project compared to 2016, compared to 2020, thinking about where we might be in 2 years. What do you think overall a good direction for the game would feel like to you?
I mean, without sounding like an idiot, getting out of alpha. I think
easy answer.
honestly, the one thing to make Star Citizen go to the next level is stop treating the live server like a test server. Treat the live server as if you are treating, your investors, your public players. Like, you owe them literally everything. Like, you do not upset your public players, the people who don't care to read the first thing about your game. Those people are like, there's not a lot of them currently because a lot of them are waiting for the no more wipes, the out of beta, the stop being an in development game. But there are some, and they get really upset when you just released a new patch. Great, I'm going to start playing now. Oh, it's been 2 weeks, you're going to wipe the server already. So I think like the test server is your test server. Live server should be your live server, and it should stay that way.
If there was a definite effect on their ability to collect data, if they were to do that, would you still say they should do that and just take that loss?
Yes.
That's the biggest thing is the being able to, they specifically said with 318 that they did not get the level of concurrency with the their stress tests that they did over that weekend. 318 and OpenPTU, they didn't get the numbers of people they needed in order to get the information that they're looking for. So they had to kick it out to live in order to get the information they're looking for. And that's the hard part is, the concurrency you get even in OpenPTU is, is orders of magnitude smaller than the concurrency you get with the live patch, especially on weekends and with events. And, you can't replicate that level of concurrency and that level of stress on your back end, without actually doing it. And, it's a really difficult balance to walk. And, they first talked about that tool. It was like last year, I think, where, the tool that they use to be able to simulate stress.
Yeah.
And, it sounds like they had been working on it, and they hadn't gotten it, really ready for prime time up until very recently. And now they're like, okay, now we have this. This is great. The question is, we don't know, is that really going to make a difference with being able to get that data? We haven't heard them report back on that. Is it going to alleviate issues like we had with 318 going forward? Is it going to help with the rollout of server meshing? And, Hopefully, with
Like-
a postmortem, we'll get information on that. But
I honestly think that they did not know that it was going to break, pushing it to live. Because as I told a lot of people, like all through PTU, I'm like, I'd much rather play the 318 PTU than play 17. It was so much better. It was
Yeah.
smoother.
Yeah,
It
it
was more stable. Even when it was crashing, the periods between crashes were so much more stable than 317. It was incredible. And then
Yeah.
318 live comes around and it completely shatters. So I honestly think that they did not know what was going to happen. But and I'm trying to talk to like a broader past 318, like 317, 3.
they didn't know it was going to happen, but they didn't know it was not going to happen.
Yeah.
But you would say that given the problems that they're running into, even in the future, if the case is that they need to push it to live to do better, or let's say, putting some crazy random arbitrary terms on this. So if they push to live earlier, that would open up their testing. They get the testing done earlier and launch in 2 months, as opposed to pushing to live maybe later when it's more stable, but that then taking, let's say, 4 months. You would still go with that 4 months, push it back. Okay.
Yes. I think Star Citizen's at the point where there's a lot of people who don't care about the development of the game.
But is that I mean, if they're still at the stage in development that they are at, then is it really make more sense to focus on that?
That's the company. That's all company. Like I would say yes. It's at its player base where the longer you now spoil that kind of people who don't care with their opinions about the game, the harder it's going to be to come back onto that line of more people coming in.
Okay.
And I would say that. Well, maybe CIG won't. There are a ton of people that say no, it's in development, just develop it for the next 30 years. Honestly, that's they have ideas that they want to add in for, as long as they have money. They will have money for this game. Well, technically, the current projections are infinite amounts of money going into the future. So they really have to make a decision whether they're going to be in development forever or they're going to actually release a product. And I don't mean Squadron, I mean the MMO. Are we going to have a live MMO anytime in our lifetime?
Don't worry yourself too much, Nas. We're young. But Star Citizen is at the point where a lot of people just like to jump in and play. Just casually be in space and do things, despite the glitches and stuff. And honestly, I love that. That's pretty cool. When I joined, nobody did that. Yes, some of us did that, but it was rough when I joined. So it is very cool that we're at that point with the game. A lot of people are satisfied with being able to play what's there right now. A lot of people are not, though. And I think Nas has a good point that they do need to focus on making sure that these people can play the game. But there's also the fact that they need to make money. That's the biggest thing with this game. And despite ship sales, yes, being the focus of making money, I think the forward development and features, the fact that we can see the future of features that we've been asking for, the gameplay that we want, that we came to Star Citizen for actually being developed, is the whole reason that money even still comes in. I think that those features being developed is what makes it possible. Obviously, I'm also showing my own bias, and this isn't about me. So let's go look at my next guest, Croncy, who's a streamer, also does some YouTube work for Star Citizen, and listen to what he has to say about this. So, given the way that the game works, being an alpha that is being built with all these features and very integral parts being added in real time, while people are playing this as their main game, not even as a test or a project, just their everyday grind. Do you think that the priorities surrounding the development match what should be happening from CIG in terms of glitches and features and stuff like that?
So there's always a lot of conversation and discussion to be had around this topic, right? The only one that I really give merit to is the Squadron 42 features versus Star Citizen features. Mm-hmm. Because there is 100% by working on solo campaign type features, you are detracting from some stuff that you could be adding into Star Citizen. Whether that's overall detrimental is yet to be seen until we see Squadron 42, basically. So in my opinion, I'm mostly okay with that, especially as they're bringing a lot of those features into Star Citizen over the next year. The one thing that I hear from a lot of people that just I never understand is when people say, well, why are they adding new features when PES is broken? And that's not, those don't mix. Like mining changes and PES, those are not the same people working on that. And the people that are working on that would not, or likely, maybe they do, but likely would not have the skill set to work on that other thing, right, on this background tech. So I kind of just dismiss those sort of claims. I think that it's 100% okay to be working on new features, especially ones that we've been seeing recently that are using old tech to just work immediately, like new missions, like the Reclaimer derelicts, all those sort of things, which are getting pumped out really quickly. Them doing that does not make server meshing come out slower, you know? So, yeah, I have been vocal of the opinion of I do want Squadron 42 to come out, and I want it to be a success because I think it can be a really, really good recruitment tool for Star Citizen, as well as to get people onto the idea of playing a game that does involve you flying ships and having this seamless, you know, FPS to ship to engineering gameplay, that sort of thing, which is not very common on really any game. Yeah, so I'm for the most part, what I've been hearing about their priorities of development have been pretty decent.
The glowing review of pretty decent from Croncy. But I do think that Croncy makes a good point again about features needing to continue to come in. I think the general curiosity about these features being developed for Squadron 42, as we've seen recently, the first, which might be EVA T2 coming in later this year, is common at this point. We've heard for almost a year and a half now, I think, that Squadron 42 active feature teams and generally those sides of teams, and definitely AI and stuff, are working on Squadron first things and will be transferred over to Star Citizen. We're still kind of waiting for the fruits of that. I think we have hit a really good stride with development of features, specifically starting with 318 more so, but we are still waiting for Squadron to start bearing some fruits of like really polished features in the game. Me and the Astro Historian, another YouTuber and Lore Stradamus, some might say, talked about this a little bit, but we also got more into the idea of, can the players who are looking at these two different sides priorities of features versus glitches have an actual effect on where the development goes? And I touched on that a little bit with Morph, but I get deeper into it here with the Historian. Let's listen. You mentioned the success, that they've had actually a little bit of trouble keeping up with the fervor and success from the community. Do you feel like the way that players are filling into the game, are joining in mass, and are getting more involved, are changing the way they develop the game, or changing what they're focusing on?
I think it's changing what they're focusing on, but I don't think it's changing the way they develop. Because the only thing that's going to improve the gameplay playability of Star Citizen is to complete the parts of the game they need to complete, which they were already trying to do in the first place, the server meshing, PES, so on and so forth. But I definitely put more of an emphasis on onboarding people into the universe, knocking off the jank that exists in the beginning of the game. And I do think that they are definitely, I wouldn't say definitely, they're definitely, yeah, I'd say definitely, they're definitely pandering more to the new players than the older players. They're trying to improve the experience of the newer players. Partially because improving the experience of new players will improve the experience of older players. So, but there's definitely more of an emphasis on newer rather than the older backers, because they want to increase this number. They want to keep it growing. But I know that CIG did not anticipate they were going to grow this fast, this quickly. So, or this much this quickly.
Yeah. So one of the things you mentioned there was onboarding experience, making it easier. We've seen that the new player experience is coming up soon. We see a UI that's being included in 319 for like button prompts and stuff like that. Like clearly they're doing what you're talking about. Do you see that shifting their priorities? Because you said that it doesn't change the development, but a lot of these new players and even a lot of old players consistently call for bug fixing, almost to the point of stop development, just get these bugs fixed, as opposed to you're talking more about the features that came in the last couple of years. What do you think they should be aiming for in terms of stability and bug fixing versus adding those features? And do you think that that's going to be changed by the players that are coming in and expecting a more finished and polished game?
I think CIG is going to try to keep that balance. Personally, and this is probably entirely unpopular, I don't care. I want this game to be finished, and you don't finish a game by stopping and then polishing bugs to make sure that the unfinished experience you've worked on is good, so that you can break all of that by adding new features that breaks all that anyways. I'm much more in favor of the hell with the bugs, full steam ahead, just keep going. CIG can stop and start fixing more of the problems when they reach a beta state, because that's the game that everyone wants to play anyways. The alpha isn't, like, anything that we do now doesn't matter in the long term. I know why people want to, because a lot of people are purchasing this game now as if it was a completed game. They see this on, Jack Fragg's channel. They see a streamer play it. They hear some word of mouth from friends, and they're like, "Cool, I'm gonna, I'm tired of Tarkov. I don't want to play DayZ anymore. The Elite doesn't really get it from me anymore. I'm just gonna go and play this game, and I'm just gonna grind like no one's business in this game, and just really make this my full game." It wasn't designed for that, and CIG wasn't even planning on that happening for people. So while there's always calls to just stabilize the game, just don't add anything new, stabilize the game, I'm of the opinion that that's a bad idea, because I don't think it actually helps the game overall long term. Do I think CIG's going to change that? I don't know. I don't anticipate them, because I think they don't want to do extra work for the sake of making a game that's unfinished more playable. But at the same time, I could still see them kind of going, all right, well, we need to stop a little bit. We need to slow down a little bit, because we're losing interest, and we suddenly caught a wind, and weren't anticipating this. If we don't stop and actually focus on it, we may not get those people back. But I'm not CIG, so.
This balance of playability versus the game's growth is clearly one of the major discussions of Star Citizen, and as you can see, still one of their major problems with 318. But I think everybody is kind of on the same page here that things like persistent entity streaming, server meshing, AI changes, all that kind of stuff is the expense of the growth that we're looking for to, see Star Citizen become Star Citizen. Now, stability, like we've all been saying, is not their highest priority, but this next take comes from SaltEMike, and he actually has a little bit of a different angle of looking at it. Going by how CIG prioritizes their development, we both know very well what they decide to put first, what they decide to put last. A lot of new players are realizing that the stability isn't exactly their first priority. Do you think that CIG needs to start to reevaluate what they're focusing on when they're developing the game?
No. And I think stability is actually their first priority.
Okay.
It just doesn't look that way because of where we are right now. Stability and user experience maybe are two different things. Everything they're doing around PES and trying to get to server meshing is clearly to create more stability. It's to make that better, right? So I think that's still their number one priority from that perspective. But then it comes down to your live server experience versus your PTU experience. And I think when it comes down to, there's clearly a disconnect between them recognizing the fact, like, I just don't know how you can't look at the 318 experience as a whole and not go, a lot of people really just want to play. Because there's a wipe, 318.0, wipe comes out, new exciting features, and so many people come out of the woodworks to play this game that they get significantly more people than they had planned for, and everything falls apart. How is that not like this super indicator of, we need to start treating the live servers as a playable experience? And the current thing that we're experiencing right now is them actively working against that with like a Xeno threat that clearly is causing issues, right? It's also highlighting issues that need to be resolved for the future, but those have now been highlighted, and now it's do something about it and allow people to at least currently enjoy the experience that you have. So stability is a priority, but the player experience isn't. And on the live server specifically.
Yeah.
Right?
When you get down to the details of what CIG has to accomplish given their position right now, it does get kind of hard to come up with a realistic solution other than just keep steamrolling ahead to try and hit some strong stability milestone while keeping the game somewhat playable. And I think that's kind of what SaltEMike is getting at. That first version of server meshing that is stable for us could be the first time we really taste actual stability in Star Citizen. And it seems like that is their goal. Push for that and then start to get the content into the game. And we've heard that a lot. And with PES coming in, now we're starting to see more content. So it could be true, but I think we're still in the phase of figuring that thing out, kind of. Interestingly, though, player retention seems to remain year over year in terms of funding, at least. And you would assume that that's true with player concurrency as well. But I actually had a lot of discussion throughout these several different interviews I did for this whole podcast episode, talking about player retention and whether new players are actually sticking around after that initial jump into the game. We also talked a little bit about how important this is to CIG for them to focus on this to keep the game healthy. Kind of got into this a little bit with Tree and Naz earlier, and you're going to hear them come back up after we touch in with the leader of the 890 Jump Yacht Club, Jorunn. So let's listen to what he has to say on this, which is a little bit positive, and then listen to maybe an opposing view or two from the other two. A lot of people do worry that this idea that the game might chase people away or might scare people from trying it again is losing them permanent customers over at CIG with Star Citizen. Do you think that CIG should be concerned about the idea that people won't come back if they've had a bad experience right now?
I think they're pretty well aware of it. I think that Todd Pappy saying that they really are focused on making it stable and playable for as many people as they possibly can. 318 being a real exception to that. Having a better new player experience, and they've been talking about that, and that's coming in the next patch in a month away. They've got a mission set up where they're going to walk a new player through, okay, well, this is how you get out of bed. This is how you look at things on your mobiGlas. This is how you go to a store and buy clothes and guns and food and go to a clinic. And we've been asking for a tutorial for years and years and years, and it's nice to see them actually finally putting that in to kind of help that new player experience. And once we get past Invictus, because I don't expect that things are going to be feeling good until Invictus is over. And then I think it's going to be probably pretty good at that point. Then I think we can really sit back as a community and evaluate, okay, well, how much of a success or failure or challenge was 318, 319 for the community overall? I think it's a speed bump. We said it's a long marathon, and we're going to have some speed bumps. I think server meshing is going to be another big speed bump where we're going to have some real challenges.
Yeah, my biggest fear is just burning players. And I've talked to like people, the like two groups of people I'm talking about are people who are waiting for it to stop being early access, basically. Because there's a great big amount of people somewhere waiting for this game to stop calling itself early access or alpha or beta. They're waiting for Star Citizen
accounts, and only 1.7 million of them have actually backed the game.
Yeah. And there's people who haven't made accounts yet. They're just waiting to hear from GameSpot, to whoever, to say, hey, Star Citizen is released.
Yeah.
There's another group that I've talked to, and I have a couple of friends who are this, who will not play the game anymore. They were burned by it. They don't want any of the bugs. They played it for a while. They're done. They're burnt. They will not come back to the game, ever. And they said this multiple times. They will not play Star Citizen anymore. And that's the number that I'm most worried about, is that number growing as the game continues to be unstable, players play the game and then get all your stuff's gone. To put all the work into it, to play the PTU, to get all this stuff, and then for some reason, either stuff gets worse, gameplay doesn't go in the way you want it to, the whatever way forward becomes muddier. I want that to cease, to have your concrete foot and say, this is Star Citizen. Here's your live version. your progress will no longer reset.
You know, even then, people are gonna still say they'll never play again because of some little thing.
Well, yeah,
And people always come back because look at Cyberpunk, and all those other games that have had really rough launches, and have had, made progress and gotten things fixed. Like people are, more and more people are buying and playing No Man's Sky, now than ever before, and it's gotten better with every update. People will say that I'll never play again, and I'm never going back there again, and they'll what's the word? Not like blacklist or whatever. Kind of like all these people screaming about Budweiser beer cans. They're going to drink Budweiser again. People have short-term memories, and they go back to what they know, and especially when they hear things from other people, hear things from friends. I don't think you're going to lose, a lot of people by temporary instability. If that was the case, Star Citizen wouldn't continue to grow, and it certainly wouldn't grow at the rate that it has been over the last several years, especially.
Yeah. All right, guys, that about wraps things up. Thank you so much for joining me for this one.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you. Yeah.
anytime.
Now, I actually agree with everybody here. I think Jorunn and Naz both were focusing on the fact that, like, they need to focus on the new player experience because there are people who will move on. There are people have lives that continue on, and there are people who will move on with their lives because they don't want to try this out. They might play it while it's in alpha, even while it's not having a bunch of features because it's a fun game, but that instability might chase people away. I get that. I also do think that Tree has a point with games like Cyberpunk and No Man's Sky, and games that can prove themselves to that initial crowd that they tried to market to, that they can deliver what they tried to. Clearly, that's becoming a very popular model for the AAA industry. Now, I think it's different for those games than it is for Star Citizen. I think Star Citizen has a little bit more leeway with doing something like that, but I also think that every month, every year, every time you delay or have to have a setback or a speed bump, as Jorunn said, you're burning a little bit of goodwill with people, and it's good to pay attention to that. But I do think that as long as you are working towards that goal of delivering what you said you are, there will be people who are sticking around, just not necessarily everybody. But I wanted to follow up with SaltEMike on this as well, so let's listen to what he had to say. Some people worry about the poor state of the game, that it chases people away. This is kind of really related to what we were just talking about, that people jump in, they have trouble either getting onboarded or learning the game, or they run into something, they don't know if it's a glitch or if that's the way the game works. It gets really frustrating. You fall through your ship, you respawn, you can't find your ship, your head's gone. Like all this stuff, right? Hits a new player. And people worry that that is really pushing people away from the game. Do you think that those people will eventually come back once they hear the game is good, or CIG should start to worry about this lack of retention with new players?
They don't share any numbers with us, of course.
Yeah,
but
we don't know factually.
Again, the only facts we have are 318. That was a moment of, it was new people, but it was a lot of people who have been waiting for a while for something to sink their teeth in for Star Citizen. I think most of the people who back this game have been waiting for something to sink their teeth into. And every once in a while, there comes a patch that is worth sinking your teeth into past, like, all right, let me jump into OpenPTU. Oh, these features look cool. Game's still buggy. I'll see you in a quarter. I'll see you, This was one I think people really wanted to dive in and play. I don't think they have to worry about player retention as much as you think, only from the standpoint of making these decisions that we talked about earlier that are really bad to essentially like dupe your backer base into thinking that the game is playable so you get the data you need, right? Like the free what was it? I think it was when 318 dropped, they just like, yeah, let's go. We dropped it to live even though it wasn't ready, because we needed the data. We needed to break it in order to fix it. So I hope, and I do think that they must have gotten a lot of refunds. They must have gotten, because Star Citizen has a really good refund policy. Obviously, like, you buy the game initially, and I think you have 30 days to try it. But I was saying to people, do you think that it's like refund now, go for it, like no big deal, but don't you think you're probably going to come back and just buy a starter ship later when things look better? So why refund now? Because you're probably getting in at your cheapest if you just buy the cheapest ship, right? And just try the free flies and wait until there's something actually worth playing. This was a very unique situation. We're still in a very unique situation. When has Star Citizen been like this?
So, as much as Star Citizen can focus on building the game, adding features, and not worrying too much about player retention, these crucial points in times like 318 and points like the new player experience seem to be pressure points that everybody is well aware of. And SaltEMike has a good point here. It's one that has kind of been repeated throughout this whole thing. The game's gotten pretty good. Like, as an alpha, yes, it's missing a lot of features. As a game that's testing a lot of tech, yes, there's a lot of glitches and bugs, and the development is slow, but compared to what we were playing before, part of the reason that people are so frustrated now is that there's actually content to enjoy, as opposed to if the game had crashed back in 3.2 when we could all get less than 20 frames per second, you weren't really missing out on 10 extra frames of much if you wanted to, hit 30. So right now, people just want to play. They want to get into 318. They want to exist. They want to be in space and try things out. Interestingly, I think this leads to a good conversation about how the game is changing based on these priorities we've been debating this whole time. So going back to my conversation with Astro Historian, I think this was a good direction that the conversation went in. Let's listen. You mentioned the success, that they've had actually a little bit of trouble keeping up with the fervor and success from the community. Do you feel like the way that players are filling into the game, are joining in mass, and are getting more involved, are changing the way they develop the game, or changing what they're focusing on?
I think it's changing what they're focusing on, but I don't think it's changing the way they develop. Because the only thing that's going to improve the gameplay playability of Star Citizen is to complete the parts of the game they need to complete, which they were already trying to do in the first place, the server meshing, PES, so on and so forth. But I definitely put more of an emphasis on onboarding people into the universe, knocking off the jank that exists in the beginning of the game. And I do think that they are definitely, I wouldn't say definitely, they're definitely, yeah, it doesn't say definitely, they're definitely pandering more to the new players than the older players. They're trying to improve the experience of the newer players. Partially because improving the experience of new players will improve the experience of older players. So, but there's definitely more of an emphasis on newer rather than the older backers, because they want to increase this number. They want to keep it growing. But I know that CIG did not anticipate they were going to grow this fast, this quickly. So, or this much this quickly.
People definitely recognize the need to improve the experience for new and old players alike. And everybody seems to want the experience, obviously, to be a smoother one and more enjoyable. But in all of these talks, it always came back to the fact that, at least at this current state in development, the push for new features and growth is very important. Now, obviously, there's no right or wrong answer on this. I think that's the great part about it. Star Citizen is a weird, unique project, and we can all have differing opinions on this. I'd love to see what kind of interesting, productive, and non-inflammatory conversations we get into in the comments down below. But to finish off this segment, we will be ending how we started. Looking at all these folks, and I guess really what they like about Star Citizen, what draws them to the game, what they find so unique. I think everybody tends to have kind of a different perspective. This game pulls people from a lot of different places, but you'll be surprised at how similar the answers end up being. Before we do get into it though, you should think about it for yourself. Consider why you like Star Citizen. Obviously, a lot of people see a lot of reasons to dislike it. So the reason for such intense passion for the game is sometimes, I don't know, curious. Anyways, let's listen into what everyone has to say. Apologies, I got call to prayer going on in the background, but we're gonna finish off with this one last question, and this is a fun one. despite the frustrations that come up with this project, that are inevitable with this project, why have you stuck around to wait for it so closely all these years?
Star Citizen is just the kind of project that, is one in a million. I mean, I don't know of a single game right now that's being developed to the level of detail and to the level of care that Star Citizen is. Yeah, there are a lot of issues with how long development is taking, and like the perception of what priorities are focusing on, the amount of time that's spent on a game that we've not even been see and play, Squadron. But for everything that they put in the game, it's always really great. Like high quality, high standard, consistent. A lot of time buggy. A lot of the time it's buggy, but it's fun, and it's trying to create a universe that I've wanted since Star Wars Galaxies. So for me, I still haven't found anything to even rival Star Citizen remotely, and that's why I'm still following the project. Should there be another game that comes out that attempts to do what Star Citizen is doing but better, I'll root for them, and I'll probably go play that game as well. But I will probably still forever be a Star Citizen diehard fan unless something really catastrophic happens. So,
yeah, to be honest, I don't think people think about that when they talk about why are people so interested in Star Citizen. They only look at the fact that Star Citizen has problems and assume that the positives must not be any more important to other people than how they see it. Because like you said, there are a lot of space games out there, but there are very significant nuances and details that just they aren't in every game. And like, people kind of miss that point, that if there was a better game, if there was something that offered this experience better, it's not like Star Citizen would be immune to losing that crowd.
Yeah, it's just that right now, the gaming landscape has been quite bleak. There haven't been a whole lot of games that have tried to do anything out of the box, new and interesting, outside of the indie studio area. Obviously, I mean, indie studios are always coming up with something new and interesting. But in our niche, and for what I'm interested in, it's been a barren desert of rather uninspired gameplay for a long time. And Star Citizen is like a beacon of hope for me, that really great, complex, interesting, semi-simulated, semi-arcadey experience is something that something that can be created. It's realistic. It's something that can happen as long as it's backer funded. I'm still so excited, despite all of the issues, despite the negativity beginning in our little conversation here. I'm still so excited for Star Citizen and its future and all it's trying to do. So, yeah.
An interesting answer we've been getting throughout this series has been the answer to what really sets this game apart for you, in terms of, like, clearly everybody is a little bit crazy to be following this game throughout these last few years. So what is it that keeps you around?
So, regardless of what people might say, Star Citizen is an RPG. I will fight them over that, and it is the most freeform and interesting RPG I've ever played. Being able to play in this space simulation, like they like using a lot of the time, but being able to do literally anything I want, being able to decide that I want to become a conglomerate miner, I want to become the best bounty hunter in the verse, whatever it might be, and having access to those tools and having all of those different elements of those gameplay loops be seamless from one step to another. There really isn't a game like it. There's a lot of games that maybe have similarities, and there's a lot of games that have like sort of cherry picked some of those things, but Star Citizen was the first game where I was like, you know what, I could see myself playing this for the rest of my life if it came to it.
I feel that. Definitely with like the concept of the idea, like the way they're building out the professions is you could just spend a year being a miner, go to different places, try ground mining or space mining, like work on a ship with somebody, like all that kind of stuff. What's an example of that you would give currently available in the game?
Well, that's the issue, isn't it? Currently available in game. And not even really talking 318. A lot of the appeal of Star Citizen comes from future features, and that's going to be the case for a very long time. We're only really getting to the elements now where some features are finally being built upon, so we're getting extra levels of depth on a couple of features. So right now, there's not really an example because there's no major goals to go for other than I want to buy the biggest ship. And that's kind of it, which is a little disappointing. But it sort of means for me right now, as the game is, the thing that continues to make me come back is the community. I've never played a game with such a connected and just this fantastic community. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out a word I was trying to use, but
it's a common sentiment, man. I mean, obviously every community has its dark spots. Star Citizen the community has their blind spots, I would say. As a whole, we can be a little bit rabid, but yeah, it's an incredibly loving place. It's literally it's like the biggest fan club. Like everybody's so excited to share what they know about the game or like what they're excited for about the game that if you come into the community and you just want to learn about it or figure out how to play it, you probably will get more than you asked for.
Yeah.
But yeah, the community's great.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what is it that sets this game apart from everything else that makes it worth that kind of effort and this kind of money and all the frustration that people are going through despite still wanting to play?
The absolute obsession and addiction to the experience. I see it all the time. I spend a lot of time in concierge chat on Spectrum, and people come in and they're venting that they can't play and they're having all these problems and they're so angry. But it's one of the things I got from Xylo several years ago, and I used to be so angry at people that were angry at CIG in the game, and then he really educated me that these people are just passionate that they want this experience, and these people are angry because they can't get it. And we saw that with the thousands and tens of thousands of people in 18.1 or 318 before we even got 318.1, which fixed a lot of the problems that people couldn't log in for all kinds of reasons, and that was really, really frustrating to people. And we got 318.1 and it fixed most of those problems. There were still people that had trouble logging in, but they worked as fast as they could to get that patch out, fixed most of those problems. 318.2 has fixed a lot more problems, introduced new problems. I think that there's nothing else out there that gives this experience of real immersion in a future science fiction universe, and that's what differentiates this project from everything else. And everything else, it's a game, and building a game is easy. Building a universe is hard.
We'll write that down somewhere. For you, what sets Star Citizen aside, or apart rather, from any other game that you've come across? Obviously, like you said, you've dedicated your everyday gameplay time to this game. You now do it for a living. Why?
There's no word for it, but it's the fact that you can get in a ship in a station, hangar doors open, fly the ship to a planet, get out of that ship, be a Halo character, kill a bunch of NPCs, gather loot, go back in your ship, and do it all again. The focus of getting in and out of your ship, and your ship possibly at some point becoming your base, your home, your like everything revolving around it. But other space games, like, you are the ship, and it's not as tactile. It's not as much yours as every other ship is, right?
Yeah.
Or every other game is. I think that's really, like, I think a lot of people would say scale or graphics or something like that. But for me, it's, I guess the word is immersion, but in a lot of ways, it's like, it's not immersion into the environment, it's immersion into the sci-fi experience.
Yeah. You're just
Right?
living
Like
in space.
Yeah, or on a planet. you're involved in a futuristic experience and it feels like you are. Now just put a game in it.
Yeah. No, I think that kind of captures it. I feel like that's what it comes down to anytime anybody ever talks about it. It's like all of the things in this game are pretty cool, but the bottom line is like it's like Second Life in space almost. Just the fun parts though, hopefully. And and
I hope not. The things that you might not find fun, others do. That's like
it always
the having a
always
space
different.
job. Like some people want that stuff. I'm a weirdo. I think that stuff's awesome.
Yeah, that's true. But just having like a very granular, immersive MMO in a setting that's not really that common for video games, I think in the last like decade or so, has brought a lot of people in. I agree with you pretty strongly there on why you like it so much.
I think it's one of the things Star Citizen does really well is they have a lot of some variations in looseness of metaphors for things that are either part of our current climate within the world, regardless of whether you're from the U.S. or Europe or Australia, Asia. There's a lot of things that players can identify within the Star Citizen universe, to varying degrees, but also historical things that are of a lot of interest. And so it makes the game, especially if you follow the lore and you're interested in the stories of like the different species and the characters, it makes the game very relatable. And from a whether it's something that's sociological or economic issues, political things, turning points in history. There's a lot of things that you can look to, within Star Citizen that, if you're interested in this in real life, you might actually be interested in this, and it might be relevant to what you want to do in game. And so I think that's kind of interesting. Well, and obviously the big one is the dystopian economic aspect. But
and the setting is a little unique, not entirely on its own, but the fact that it is a first-person simulator allows them to say, hey, you're going to a storefront, you're talking to an employee who can have simple lines that let you know that the employee that you're talking to works for a company who owns the building that's owned by the city that owns the planet, and like speak towards kind of that the undertones of how corporate business has like ruined that area. And that's something you can't really do if you're just one spaceship trading with another spaceship on a little text box.
Mm-hmm. For all of us who have enjoyed space sims for years and years and years, it's a level of depth that is unprecedented when it comes to storytelling and immersion, as Paul always says. That you can't get from what we've traditionally had in space games. And even though there's writers may have through a text box or even sometimes voice acting tried to give you that, it doesn't do it in the same way of having it from a first person perspective in your face and being something that you react to. You really you have to try hard to ignore it, which is pretty cool. Walking around through ArcCore or Hurston.
Yeah, and then like speaking like on the layers that you said, like we also we have the megacorp like problem, we'll call it, but we also have like real time politics, literal in-game politics with the 10-year mayor vote that we did. Every 10 years, there's a not mayor, I said mayor, imperator vote. There we go.
Yeah.
And like the big question is like, where should the UE spend their money? Should it be internal development or should it be external fighting or defense or whatnot? Should they be caring about law and order? Should they be caring about should they be policing or should they be giving that to mercenaries? Kind of like there's like on every kind of genre of politics, there is something in Star Citizen, whether that be like internal, external relations, crime, agriculture, business, like through all the spaces that could have been a genre of politics, there was something in Star Citizen, at least one paragraph.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see if the way that they work with the Imperator and the elections and all that kind of stuff. I mean, they talk a little bit about how like there are people or what are they called? What's the other race? The Tavaran. There are Tavaran individuals who are like in the Senate, and how them and the elections of the Imperator and all that kind of stuff affects the actual rollout of the game. It really makes me wonder, like, how much can they how much can they really change the way that things happen based on what's going on with the politics in the background? Because like you said, it's not even just the elements in the game. It's literally that we're affecting and choosing our own politics. It's a lot of detail to put into a game like that.
Absolutely.
You start to hear the record on repeat there. I think it's pretty clear people really like the immersion of this game, but even deeper, I think part of what makes people love this game so much is just the ability to be in it. We've never had the ability to build a game like this. Like going as far back as video games, space games were just flying around in ships, and you couldn't really realize a large area that could contain planets and ships and actual space. So this is already kind of a new concept for a game. And if you look at like all the big games that are coming out nowadays, you could be like, oh yeah, I love that game. That's like it's like Stalker from back in the day, or it's like BioShock from before, or that one is like City Skylines. Like there are examples for games. You can't really do that with Star Citizen. Like even Squadron 42, you can be like, oh, it's like Freelancer. But Star Citizen itself as an MMO and the way that it's set up is kind of hard to pin down. And that's why I think so many different players come from different places to play this game. But I could be completely off, and this might not be the main draw for the game for all of you. I would love to hear, though, what you have to say. I'd like to know in the comments down below what you thought of this whole thing, what you think is the draw to this game, what you think of the priority between features and stability. And I'd like to thank you for joining me for this. Honestly, it's an honor. I didn't think I'd be able to ever do a podcast. I never wanted to do a podcast, so this is kind of weird, but reaching episode 100 feels amazing, and it's really cool that there are this many people who are interested in this kind of stuff to follow along with. So make sure to catch this on audio platform if you want. This is a regular weekly podcast. It's on my second YouTube channel, linked down below once again, which you can find down there. I would appreciate any reviews, subscribes, comments, ratings, feedback, whatever. This is a new format of podcast I'm doing, and I don't think it's something I'm going to do too often because it's a lot of work. But I had a lot of fun with this, and I hope you did too. Next week we'll be back to regular scheduling with STL Youngblood joining me to talk ships. And make sure to check out the previous episode before this, talking about Elite Dangerous and why players started to leave that game. Hint, it kind of has to do with what all these people were saying at the last segment in this podcast episode. Anyways, one last time, thank you so much for joining me for 100 episodes, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this one, and I'll see you next week.